This is interesting when you, of course, I could, I could point out, I guess, what seemed to me to be key things you just shared. I mean, obviously, it, it in the beginning, you didn't have a box to put it in. You know, God showed you the box to put it in. You went typical sort of experience of thinking, wow, and they're all going to be really, and they are friendly. Don't misunderstand us. But there's a difference between friendliness and deep relationship. That's another, to me, key
Absolutely.
point is we go down with a typical American view of everybody's going to like me, and they do. They're pretty nice folks,
Yeah.
but they're not going to be close to you till they really test you. So that's hard. And then
Yeah.
finding that the not only does the mission community at home not really get it, but the mission community there where you're going, they don't get it either. You're like, well, am
Yeah.
I a leper? What's going on with me, right?
Yeah.
But I love the fact, and you and I talked about this in a conversation, I guess, last week or week before. You described yourself as a person who perseveres, and that really is the story here, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
got into it, and it wasn't easy, and it wasn't like the world's worst experience. It wasn't like you went home every night and cried to your pillow, but you had to persevere, or it would not have happened. And we know that's the grace of God, but that's critical. And now, just as you were talking about it, I want to throw this to you because we're kind of getting closer up to like present time. Uh, but you mentioned, really penetrating the community through business leaders. And that's such an important thing for people to think about, for our listeners to think about, and the agencies and the businesses they represent. Uh, you know, this so Latin America is not America in the 1950s, where everybody dresses up and goes to church on Sundays. It's the same dynamic of folks aren't going to church anymore. Believers go, but unbelievers don't go on a Sunday typically because it's not the cultural norm. And with a Catholic background, they might go on special holidays. Some will go more regularly, but it's not this fertile preach the gospel at church kind of time period. But it is, to me, the great white field white for harvest is the business community. That's where the people are. You either have a business or you work in a business. I mean, there's not a lot of
Yeah.
alternative. And so where are you going to go? You're going to go where they are. And I love that you've done that. And now you're building networks and leadership and training. I mean, as you began in the start of the podcast, you're doing an amazing number of things. And I don't know how you do it. Those of you listening on the podcast, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll get to see this glorious backyard that I'm seeing over Scott's shoulder. It's like, okay, doesn't look so tough, but it is tough. But you're building something that's really multidimensional. Now, and we'll start wrapping up. I want to kind of get into your future just a little bit. You mentioned to me that you're thinking about another transition. Obviously, when the adoption of Lucas is complete and you're free to travel and all that goes with that, but you're thinking of a transition. Tell us a little bit about that and how at least you anticipate staying connected to this community that you built, because you are that catalyst. I teased you about your name, regional catalyst but you are that. And so what will happen when the catalyst is a few thousand miles away?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, we didn't talk a lot about where we got to and how we're doing this stuff with BAM, but the short version of the build up, and then I'll answer your question quickly, is, a few years ago, as my experience through all of that had kind of gotten us in connection with BAM Global, um, we basically were participating in I think the first virtual one they did, the first virtual conference that BAM Global did, I think it was 2020. And um, they were going to have these network tables that were going to meet virtually. And Joe Plummer, who's one of the kind of co-leaders of that movement, sent out an email that said, if anybody is interested in having another table added for something that's not mentioned, let us know and we'll consider it. And so I just responded because there was nothing related to Latin America or Spanish speaking at all. And I said, could we possibly have a table for Spanish speakers, especially like Latin America? And she said, yeah, if you're willing to host it, I'm happy to have you, have a room for you guys. And so we did open that room. And I think there was like 12 to 14 people that got connected. And out of that group, we kind of decided we'd all share, whoever wanted to, our phone numbers, and we created a little WhatsApp. And now here we are 4 years later, and we've got, I think, close to 300 people in that WhatsApp group. A number of others are connected in different ways. So yeah, that's been kind of where I think we talked about. I feel like the Lord long term in this transition is going to be kind of helping me continue to be a bridge for that network.
Mhm.
As you said, the kind of catalyst word, I think, is a part of that as well. One of the things that I've been doing in this network is helping institutions that exist, organizations like Faith Driven, for example, Faith Driven Entrepreneur. They have their foundations course. They had it all developed in a participant guide for Spanish, but there was no facilitator guide for Spanish, and they weren't seeing a lot of expansion in the amount of courses that were being offered. I took the course as a participant and then was going to try to lead it. And when I went in, it was all only in English. I reached out to them and said, "Hey, I think I might have figured out why you're not having, quite the expansion, because they're having huge success with this multiplication effect all over the country, all over the world in English speaking, places. But that wasn't working here. And so I simply just helped them translate the facilitator guide to Spanish. Got some other Latinos to help me review to make sure my translation was good, and a few other documents that they had, and some other things just to create some of the publicity that because they give you tons of great resources in English, but none of that was in Spanish.
Yep.
And so we just kind of helped create all those other pieces that they already were doing for facilitators in English. And now we are starting to see, this expansion happening rapidly in Latin America. And the similar type thing I'm working with a couple of organizations doing similar things. And that's really where I see long term, kind of the Lord leading me, is to kind of be that we talked about when we were talking about neglect, and this restrict the struggles of the lack of English in Latin America, even among very well educated and high level business people. When you go to most of the rest of the world, when you get to a pretty high level business person, executive level, even just employee, the majority of them do speak enough English to get by, Yeah, it's just not the case in most of Latin America, honestly. There are certain business and certain sectors that are a little more particular about that. But the majority, I shared with you when we were chatting the other day, I have a friend and a brother from my church who has a very successful business. I'm not going to get into too many details because I don't want to embarrass him, but very successful business. And he just doesn't really speak English at all. And I'm talking significant success, like very, very big business. But his English is very minimal and not enough to read and write for sure. And so if I want that person to engage with, some other part of the business's missions ecosystem that exists, and they don't have things in Spanish, they can't. And that is a hindrance on this ecosystem continuing to develop. And so that's really where I feel like the Lord has put me in this place due to my connections and my, ability to speak Spanish and English well. I feel like that's where he's leading me over this, as we look at a transition. We're not sure exactly what it's going to look like, the timing of it, but eventually, yes, we hope to move back to the United States. We're praying that very soon Lucas's stuff will get sorted. I imagine that we would, then sometime next year, Lord willing, go at least for a period of time and see whether it's for good or not. We're just going to see what happens and how the Lord leads going forward. My hope is that maybe we could be there all of next summer and then see what happens from there. But first we got to get this judge to sign off on this adoption, hopefully very soon.
Yeah. We're praying to that end, and many of these listeners are already praying for that. But you see how that all connects. And And so, Scott, you and I could go on forever. We did this the other day. We got to talking and we were laughing, and you're an easy guy to talk with, and you got a great story, and I enjoy you, and I'm really glad we finally got connected. We should have. It's funny we didn't bump each other before now, but we finally did, and
Yeah.
I'm really glad for that. Your story's a great one. I know it's an encouragement to everybody. Guys, all of the stuff will be in the show notes, all the contacts, the websites for various organizations. I do encourage our listeners, uh, and maybe you are a Spanish speaking or a Portuguese speaking Latin American, or maybe you're in another part of the world and a Spanish speaker or a Portuguese speaker. Don't feel like you're alone. This is a movement that is really catching fire within the Latin community. Scott, you see it from your perspective. I see it from different places I go. I'm very excited. My my handicap is I've discovered that the secret to learning languages has to do with your ability to hear. And I have very, very bad hearing. And therefore, I can read and write Spanish, but I cannot speak it to save my life. And so I'm working. I'm not giving up. I've been at it for 12 years. So you're a perseverant guy. So am I. But I'm doing it because I believe something special is happening in the Latin community. And I'm just thrilled to death you're there.